Hello, everybody. Welcome back to this edition of Nobody Likes Recruiters. This is a podcast for you. If you, stop laughing, lads, if you want to boss your recruitment game. Today on the podcast, we are talking about why nobody likes recruiters, which is a topic that I'm really kind of excited to get into as we named the podcast Nobody Likes Recruiters.
Yeah.
So let's start then, because this is like the $1 million question. I've always, just to kind of like add this in, as somebody who's never worked, hasn't worked in recruitment for a long time, never properly, I've always had a bit of I've not had the best experience with recruiters. I think that's probably a sentiment that's echoed by a lot of people out there. So why do you think nobody likes recruiters then? Lee, I'll start with you.
Yeah, it's quite an interesting sort of topic. And I mean, when did you first realise you didn't like recruiters? We've come from an internal recruitment background, so...
Probably the first day from working in internal, constantly getting sold to... I think sometimes the frustration for me has been...
When you say you constantly getting sold to, when you were working internally for a recruitment agency, do you get external recruitment agencies pitching to you?
When we were working in internal recruitment and agencies were our suppliers, working at Phones for You.
Of course,
they were kind of supplying people into us. And I think the biggest bit, wasn't it, when you realised that you were just a number. It was just pure sales. That was it. You were constantly being sold to. It was very transactional. It was all about just getting bums on seats and getting a fee.
Yeah,
it was probably the biggest bit.
I think taking it back a bit, do people really hate recruiters, or do they hate the kind of practices, the recruitment process? So you've always got to remember, and particularly, internally, when we worked internally, recruitment is a stressful time for anybody involved. Generally, the business is under some form of pressure. A business has got a hole, a business has got a gap, somebody they need to recruit. At Phones for You, it was all kind of sales driven, wasn't it? So if there was somebody not in store selling, there was a gap in the store, the sales manager wouldn't be able to hit target. They needed to recruit straight away. So they were quite stressed. And then from the candidate point of view, it's a huge deal. Changing job is a huge deal to people. So, it's quite stressful, the thought of, applying. Interviews concern some people. They get quite nervous.
A lot of time invested, when you think about these processes that could be 2-3 stage interviews and expense of getting there. There's quite a lot on the line, isn't there, for candidates from that point
for businesses and candidates. The time that we've spoken about this actually on the previous episode was the do's. In fact, it was the do's and don'ts of how to kind of like interview, I think. And we were talking about the time invested by a business in the recruitment phase. So the candidates are investing their time. There's a lot of jeopardy for them. They need a job. Right. And the businesses need to recruit somebody to fill that position. So there's jeopardy on both sides, isn't there?
I think as well, and I don't know whether you'd agree, there's quite a lot of smoke and mirrors within recruitment, isn't there? I think you're stuck between trying to do the right thing for the candidate, trying to do the right thing for the business. You've got candidates chasing you up, business chasing you up. It's trying to make sure that you're managing everyone's expectations in the right way. When half the time, as recruiters, you might even be in the dark of what's going on. You might not actually know anything. You might not be able to give an update. You realise that everyone's frustrated with you. But it can be stuck in the middle, aren't you?
Recruiters can be stuck in the middle, and the job involves delivering a lot of rejection and a lot of bad news to people. Whether it's like we were discussing earlier, any particular role, generally only one person gets the job. There could be 100 applicants there, 100 applicants that are unsuccessful, that are somehow got to be delivered that news that they haven't got the job, and we'll get onto communication later. And also with the employer, they might have the heart set on a candidate who they want to offer the role to. The candidate turns the job down. So there's a lot of adding to all that pressure and that stress and the smoke and mirrors. There's a lot of bad news and rejection that goes that goes with recruitment as well.
Yeah, because you had one not long ago as well, to be fair, where a candidate should have been starting. They set up all his IT. He was due to be going for the candidate not to start. And again, I think the recruiter can sometimes take the rap for it, can't you? While have you not managed the candidate sufficiently, or
when was the last time you spoke to the manager? What type of information?
Yeah, that's it. And it's kind of like, and we understand it. We're there. We're just probably as disappointed, and you'll take the brunt of it. But I think that's where the frustration comes, is it doesn't always result in a positive outcome, does it, even for clients?
And sometimes after an interview, you've then got to go back to a client and say, oh, do you know what? The candidate didn't like the job. He didn't think you offer enough holidays, and sometimes they see it as kind of, they take it quite personally. Companies do as well. And sometimes the recruiter can almost get kind of blamed for that as well.
But it's interesting. I was chatting to a candidate the other day. He's kind of head of sales level. Anyway, he was, I think where the biggest frustration gets to is the level of understanding. So for him, he felt that he was getting contacts, calls, people reaching out to him, but ultimately they didn't have any idea of the level that he was at, or what kind of role would be suitable for him, or what matched his experience and skills. So he's getting pitched jobs that were 10 years. Jobs that were 10 years previous in his career. Yeah.
So what have they done there then, Steve? Have they just basically done a search on
anyone's sales CV?
CV, and they've not actually taken the time to look at the CV and see how long ago that it was that he worked.
And from a candidate's point of view, again, I can see both sides of the coin. The recruiter's reaching out, they've got to talk to people about opportunities, but there is that level of frustration when you're kind of talking to people about a role that is clearly not going to work. You're wasting your time, my time. And their point was as well, and again, should this matter or not? But I don't know, have they had the depth of experience to even to be qualified or to know, his skill set and what it's been. So I think that's sometimes, whereas it tends to be quite a lot of people coming from uni can get into recruitment, and sometimes that lack of understanding of how it works within commercial and corporate structures can be a frustration.
Do you think, because there's such a low bar to entry, and again, we've spoken about this on the podcast, so if you listen to this podcast for the first time, this is the 8th episode. So, there's a wealth of information already there. But one thing we've spoken about is how there's such a low bar to entry.
Yeah.
And like any industry, there's ways of doing it good and bad. And it's an art form within itself to do it well.
Yeah.
So how much, we've got written down here is some of the bad practices which feed into this notion that nobody likes recruiters, that recruiters are cowboys. How much would actually recruitment benefit if there was some kind of like bar to entry, where you had to do some kind of course, at least in like basic recruitment?
And there is, and I think there is, again, there's some of the industry specialism agencies, people that have worked in hospitality and then have gone to recruit into hospitality.
Yeah.
I'm not saying that people can't do it, that are, kind of young and out of uni. It's just sometimes context is really important, I think, isn't it, within recruitment, is actually being able to understand culture, environments, where it fits within corporate structures and stuff. It just context really does help, personally, I think, in recruitment.
And I think, because we were looking at some recruitment job adverts out there, and I was taking a look through some agency adverts, how they were written. And 90% of those adverts out there, all they were focused on was sales, business development. Must be come on board to grow a cold desk, must be confident making cold calls. So it seems as though the industry is so sales driven, and what they actually recruit for generally is sales ability and sales skills, and somebody who's resilient, rather than an actual quality recruiter. And in my experience, and coming from an internal recruitment background where there was very little sales, what we learned is the fundamentals of recruitment. So matching culture, what's the difference between a competency-based interview, biographical, how does it fit in? Not just recruiting for, to get a candidate slung forward to an employer, but recruiting for somebody who would fit in with the business. So getting an in-depth knowledge and understanding of the business, what will work. And working internally, we get to see candidates who came on board maybe in an entry-level customer service role, and 2 years later, they were then team leaders, and building that into a knowledge of them when we re-recruited the position, like what skills and abilities, rather than must be sales driven, must be confident making cold calls, because it's two different skill sets.
Yeah, absolutely. I think if you think about the profile of a salesperson, there are certain attributes that a good salesperson has.
Yeah.
So if you're looking for that person, then they're going to take those assets and those attributes and bring them into how they recruit, and that's going to then come through in the recruitment process. So then you do get these situations where it's very much cutthroat, and people are going after numbers and throwing anything at the wall. Yeah. You mentioned phones view. So when when I worked with you for a brief period of time in the recruitment department at Photo, I remember this quite clearly. Like the agencies at the time, you'd be like, why have they put this person forward?
Yeah.
But purely, so is that because there's just a really an obsession with like numbers, cultures,
sales driven, isn't it?
Yeah.
All recruitment is sales driven.
And I think, again, it's probably not an agency. Agencies get a bad rap, and consultants, you get some great people out there. I think the biggest thing is it can be how it's driven by the company. So if it's the first CV that the company gets on the desk, it is a numbers game, and that's how some people treat it. It can affect your process. Ultimately, is probably what I'm saying. So, why you're putting them forward depends on what you're paying them. Again, drive down your agency and your fee. And it takes quite a lot of time to resource somebody, so that can ultimately affect, what you.
I spoke to a client just before the podcast. Actually, a new client called up. He'd emailed us about a role he'd like us to look in, and when I said, are there any other agencies working on the role? He says, "Oh yeah, you're in a circle with about 10 other agencies." And I was like, well, I was trying to explain to him why that drives bad practices, because it's so sales driven. The agency that gets paid is the one that sends the CV forward first. So if an agency is working against 10 others, they haven't got time to actually do a quality process and assess, because
over to them.
Because the other agency who's just sales driven and targeted on chucking CVs forward, and they've got a huge target above the head, might just send every CV they think's remotely relevant forward to the role without proper qualification, just to make sure that CV lands first. Whereas that isn't proper recruitment, is it really?
And so in some part, that's not all of the agency's fault, because if it's just the way some people are driven, that's the way that some agencies are driven. And I still think you should probably back yourself and try and do a bit of a better process even in that situation, really. But it's it can be difficult from an agency point of view, which again ultimately affects and comes back to the bit why people don't like recruiters, because candidates can feel like a number in that situation. They're not probably properly represented, and all the other kind of bits and pieces. So there's lots of other kind of things that fall off from that.
Well, you mentioned that this is a great segue, because we're going to talk about the effect of all this on client on candidate experience, and also on client experience. But let's go into a little bit more detail about how this impacts a candidate for a second, because that's quite. Because I've experienced this.
Ultimately, I'd say a candidate can often feel rushed through a process and rushed to make decisions when, off one call, can I decide whether this company is going to be the right company for me, or the right job, or the right spec, right location? But probably not really, not to put quality thought into it. So I think it's a thing where if you got a CV, get it through, and candidates just get one call, push through, and that's it, job done, isn't it? And it's off the recruiter's desk and onto the companies. And
do you know what, sometimes a bit of a hindrance, and I assume there's reasons for this, but when I see a job advert and it's like, sounds like a really good role, but then because they're being coy about the company that they're recruiting for, there's no information on the company. And I think that for me is like a big red flag. Because I'm like, what? I'm going to apply for a job where I don't know
who it is,
who the company is. Why? So why do recruiters do that then?
So that's kind of that's sort of standard practice, really. If we were to write an advert about a company, you would generally not disclose the company name. One, because other agencies might then contact the company and try and say, we've got a great candidate better than that agency that they can put forward. Another reason is candidates might see the advert and go and apply for the company directly. And bypass you out of the process. But you can still write a really good advert capturing, what the company is about, capturing the company sort of personality, ethos, sell the company. But then that's part of our follow-up conversation where we have a really in-depth chat with the company about the position.
I mean, I thought there was probably a legitimate reason. It sounds like a legitimate reason, but on the first one though, in terms of not letting other recruitment agencies go to the business and see if they can muscle in, that's cutting your nose off to spite your face, because how many good candidates don't apply for jobs they don't know who the company is?
Potentially.
So you might be loosening the quality of your pool. So you've got effect on client experience there, Lee.
Yes,
as well. You want to elaborate a little bit on that?
Yeah, I think ultimately, if a process is too sales driven, it will have an impact on the client experience. So like we said, first to send the CV forward gets paid. That causes shortcuts in the actual recruitment process, because rather than fully qualifying. It's like, right, I need to get the CV across ASAP to beat the other agencies. There's what we've experienced before in the past from an internal advantage, because, if I'm representing you, Adam, you've got a fee above your head, which is important to me. So there is, we've had candidates, haven't we, when we're working internally, that have been over-prepped by the agency. So much so, actually, on one occasion at Phones for You, where a candidate came for interview, aced the interview, and this was through an agency, walked out to the interview, left a sheet of paper on the desk, and it was all the questions that we were going to ask.
So the crib sheet too.
Yeah, like literally a crib sheet provided by the agency. So there's all these little, actually, recruiters have got a lot of power. They're the middlemen between the employer and the candidate. So, we're a really trusted role. We do have the opportunity to influence a candidate, to tell them, a bit too much about the role, to give them a competitive edge. Yeah. We have the opportunity to hold things from both parties. And, any good recruiter won't do that. But I think if, you're at the last week of the month, you need to hit a target, and you've recruited a sales-driven person who's deep down sales rather than recruitment, then,
it's very easy from afar to say that's bad practice, but when you're actually in it,
that's why you've got a target to hit, and at the end of the day, for some people.
And it also, I suppose, it leads to, we'll go to a quick break in a second, but also I think it leads to recruiters maybe just neglecting certain bits of information that might be for a candidate and being like, we'll just ignore it.
I think probably one of the other things from a business point of view, just popped into my head, is like, it can just feel like all you bothered about was your fee, and then once your fee's done, you're gone and into the sunset, and there's no real sharing of risk or that relationship or that kind of want to both succeed. It's just, I'm sound, I've got my fee, and then off into the sunset I go. Whereas really the best businesses that we work with, there's almost that shared want to achieve the same things. Ultimately, I want to put good candidates in, want good candidates to stay, want to have longevity with that business and work with that business. And you only get that from delivering good results. And probably one other kind of thing is just the bit around when the going gets tough, quite a lot of agencies can go missing. And if you've invested all your time into one agency to try and find and source and select somebody, and then all of a sudden radio silence, that's what gets the bad rep, isn't it? Because maybe the recruiter doesn't want to deliver the bad news to the company to say your offering's not going to quite hit the mark, or you're not paying enough, or whatever it is.
But I think if a company briefs a role to 4 agencies and all agencies know about it, they're not going to put the same amount of effort into your vacancy as if that company's just giving you the role to work on. And again, communication is a big thing, isn't it? A lot of agencies aren't there when you need to speak to them. They are there when they're sending candidates forward, but once it gets tough, they might move on to the next vacancy. And if there's 4 agencies working on them, it's dead easy to think, do you know what, another agency will pick, I'm not going to give that role full attention. And before you know it, you've briefed the role out to 4 agencies, none of them have filled the role because they're all giving it 10% of the time. Whereas if you would have just picked one great agency, gone with them exclusively, held them accountable to recruiting, you worked with them, you get a lot higher percentage chance of filling the role.
Getting the top talent, isn't it? I remember when, and
cliche top talent.
Yeah, that's just cliche. Sorry about that. But the reason why I say that is I remember when we did a tender, didn't we, at Phones for You, where we looked at agencies for the PSL. And anyway, the whole tender ended up driving down agency fees because it was an e-auction kind of bidding tool, wasn't it?
It was good though. It was a good day.
It was interesting.
We got popcorn, sweets. It was like eBay. You could see all local agencies all bidding on different roles. It was good.
But in the end, what transpired is the margin got driven down so low, and ultimately, Phones for You's recruitment's worth 5 million. You get a slice of X pie. But I remember one of the guys coming to us, and it was a decent agency actually that we were working with, and said, "Listen, like, as much as we want to work with the business, if you're now paying 9%, 10%, 11%, whatever it kind of was at the time, there's a business up the road that's paying 15%, 16%. Like, as much as I want to tell my consultant to send it to you, it makes no sense. It's the same candidate for the same money, and there's a company paying more down the road. And that's ultimately the thing when people drive down your fees. You don't get as excited maybe to kind of work for that vacancy, do you? At the end of the day, it's, you want to be paid fairly for what you kind of do in the work that you kind of put in sourcing. So there is lots of intricacies that companies don't always see that. And that's why they dislike recruiters, and it's all about the fee, and actually, there is a bit to it. Well, actually, somebody's paying me a fair fee down the road.
Yeah, no, really, really interesting stuff. So let's go to a quick break. Remember to hit the like button, subscribe, do all that good stuff. And in the second part, we will finish off this conversation about why nobody really likes recruiters. See you in a second. Not only can recruitment be a rather frustrating process, it can also be pretty time consuming. But thankfully, the team at Logic Resourcing can take all that pain away from you. Lots of agencies say that they do recruitment differently. We've all heard it. But as you know from this podcast, both Lee and Steve at Logic genuinely mean it. Now, put it this way, 94%, yes, that's right, 94% of the candidates that they submit attend their interviews, and Logic have a 90% success rate on exclusive assignments. That's pretty impressive. So if you're looking to ace your recruitment, make your life easier, and find those diamond candidates, start by letting Logic take the stress out of all of this for you. Give us a call or email info@logicresourcing.com. Hello everybody, welcome back to Nobody Likes Recruiters. Before the break, we were talking about why nobody likes recruiters, and then before the show, actually, Lee mentioned the term to me, and I was like, I need to pick you up on that on the show. And it's called triple dipping. Now, if you're a recruitment normie like me, you've got no idea what he's talking about. It sounds a little bit nefarious. I won't speculate as to what I think it means. Please tell me what triple dipping means. Well, give us some more anecdotes about, again, why nobody likes recruiters.
So this is something that I'd never heard of before we set up the agency. And the only reason I heard about it is because we were recruiting for a recruiter.
You're recruiting for
we're a recruitment agency, recruits recruiters for another recruitment agency.
Wait. So you're recruiting for a recruiter for another recruitment agency.
Yeah.
Why?
Why does another recruitment agency get rec to rec's a big thing? So it was for a data science.
So we've got triple dipping, rec to rec.
Yeah.
Just getting confused.
Yeah. Right, triple dipping. So I even have to think now. It confuses me a bit. So this candidate that we were interviewing, I was talking to him about his recruitment background, and he was actually quite impressed when I asked him for one of his biggest achievements. He actually brought up triple dipping. So
right,
triple dipping is, and let me see if I can explain this right. So you poach a candidate from a company.
Okay, so they're already working.
Yeah, poach the candidate, pull the candidate out of that company and place them into another role that you're recruiting.
All right.
Yeah. 3 months later, you re-recruit the role from the company that they've been poached out of.
Yeah.
The candidate you've placed into the other company, after their rebate period of 3 months is finished, you poach them back out of that company into another company.
So that's after you get your fee.
Yes, and then refill the role that you have just left the hole in the company, if that makes sense.
Yeah, it does. It does. I hope that makes sense to everybody listening and watching at home. So why was that? To that guy, is this bad recruitment process?
Yeah, 100%.
Essentially, he's earned quite a lot of money all on one person, one head. It's very
so
bad.
that's terrible practice in recruitment.
About this, and you're like, you're not supposed to be telling me.
Yeah. But he was like, do you know what? Yeah, it was a really good month commission wise. I was top of the sales leaderboard.
Yeah.
And unbelievable. I'd never heard of triple. But
so that, ladies and gentlemen, we can wrap this podcast up. It's why nobody likes recruiters. I'm joking.
Triple dippers. but unbelievable.
Yeah.
Wow. And he was telling you that like as if he was telling me like a source of pride for him.
A badge of honour.
Which I think, sorry to interject again, but it's getting me quite animated because this is quite interesting. I think that's that right there in a microcosm is why people don't like recruiters.
Yeah.
That's such bad. And the fact that he sees that as a source of pride within the industry reflects badly on the industry, doesn't it? Because if it was an industry where things were done properly, he would not admit that out loud.
No.
It's like akin to I work for a company that makes trading cards, and I'm telling you that we created like fake cards and got away with it in a way. And then I made loads of money for it. And you're like, you made it fake. What were you doing?
No, it's definitely not a thing. sure be doing.
Definitely not.
So how did you, on the conversation, we'll come to you in a main shop, but on the conversation, did you just kind of laugh that off, or did you actually pull him up on it?
Yeah, I kind of laughed it off in a way. I asked what his employers thought about it like, and he was kind of like, well, he was surprised that I'd never heard of triple dipping.
Really?
Yeah, it was like, so if, we probably weren't au fait to that. We've never worked in a recruitment agency before, so, it makes me think, well, other things we're not au fait to.
Yeah.
And don't get me wrong, I think 60-70% of the agencies out there wouldn't allow that, or whatever agency you work for, you might have got away with it, but I don't think it's standard practice. I wouldn't have thought. But
no, Steve, and what do you think? How do you think the company would react if they found out about that?
They won't work with him again, would they? I mean, at the end of the day, I think it's just not. It's not displaying the right values, is it?
It's just short-sighted.
Yeah,
I'll get my fee this month. If the company did find out, they'd never work with you again. They'd never work with the agency that you worked with again.
Yeah.
If I'm placing a candidate and then contacting a candidate about another role, if I was a candidate, I'd think, I want you to find the right role for me, not just keep pulling me out and putting me into different businesses. So, yeah, it probably does epitomise quite a bit of what we spoke about so far.
It really does. It really does.
But I think on the other side, wasn't it? We were talking about the candidate side as like the bit that candidates gets frustrated with is the responses or the lack of response or not getting through to the next phase. But I think, like you were saying, the amount of CVs you may get to an application that could be completely irrelevant, and you're screening out God knows how many, it can be quite frustrating. I mean, sometimes we get electric bills, we get different things instead of CVs uploaded. It's time consuming, isn't it, in the end? And you've got a bin man applying for a project manager role, which nothing wrong with both professions, but it's a complete waste of time, isn't it?
Yeah.
Half the time.
And that is another time why, communication is a reason candidates say that, a lot of candidates don't get responded to or rejected, but time is of the essence for a lot of recruiters, isn't it? They've only got so much time in the day. And if, like Steve says, we get 100 applications for a project manager and only 3 or 4 are even suitable, then I think candidates do need to take some responsibility of reading the job ads properly, applying for right and relevant positions where you can see some form of transferable skills.
Yeah, that's it. And there's nothing wrong with people applying with transferable skills, is there? It's just like they're completely irrelevant. It's just frustrating.
So why don't we wrap the episode up in a really nice way, and you give us each one quick synopsis on what you think that recruiters can do to change the perception of recruiters. You mentioned, Lee, that on Google, when you type in recruiters, or you get some colourful language, snakes.
Yeah, blah, 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 yeah.
Snakes
gets
being
worse.
probably
the only one I could say
that we can use. So what do you think, Steve, we'll start with you. Yeah. What do you think? What advice would you be giving to your fellow recruiters? Not from a high and mighty place, of because you understand some of the challenges they face, but to really change perceptions in this area.
I think ultimately it's just treating people with respect, isn't it? We've all probably been on the other side of the recruitment piece. So communication, correspondence, getting back to your people, keeping them updated, it's just the basics really of actually how you'd want to be treated. I know that sounds really cliche, but you put yourself in the shoes of the person that's got no job and everything's riding upon an interview that they're going to go into. It's about talking to them, supporting them, helping them. Like that's the kind of biggest bit that you need to do, isn't it?
I think as recruiters, when we are in a position of power, where people come to us when they're generally at a stressful position, our job as recruiters should be to deliver a quality recruitment process and make life easier for the stakeholders that we deal with, whether that be the company or the client. We all want the same goal. We get paid when we fill a role. There's no other way about doing it, but there's a right way to do it as well. I think by doing the right thing by both, if you can, it leads to not only filling position, but a long-term relationship with the clients and the ability to support them better.
Yeah. And okay. So that covers candidates and clients respectively, because there's the whole perception of recruiters by candidates and then perception of recruiters from companies and clients. I think you've done a really good job of summarising that. It's been a lot of fun to do this episode, because if you don't know, nobody likes recruiters. You will know this because there'll be an advert halfway through the show that talks about what you guys do. But I think it's a really important topic for us to do, and I think that there's a lot of opportunity in the recruitment space for things to be done a little bit better. And hopefully maybe this episode goes some way to at least maybe making people think a little bit differently about some of the things we've discussed. So if you enjoyed it, as always, please like, share, subscribe, and leave us a comment as well. It's great to get feedback on what we're doing here. And we will see you again next time on Nobody Likes Recruiters.